My name is Sadek Torabi, and I'm going to present our paper titled ChargePrint, Framework for Internet Scale Discovery and Security Analysis of EV Charging Management Systems. Now, I'm presenting this paper on behalf of the first author, Mr. Tony Nasser, who was our former student who couldn't attend the conference today. So, all of us, we notice in the current years or in the recent years, the increasing number of electric vehicles on streets. For example, by 2021, the number of EVs tripled as compared to the previous 3 years to reach about 16 million vehicles worldwide. In 2022 alone, about 10 million electric cars were sold globally. And we project that by the end of 2023, another additional 13 million electric vehicles to be sold all around the world. Now, the rapid adoption of these electric vehicles has led to an increase in charging demands. So, to basically meet these increasing charging demands, there is a need for expanding the EV charging infrastructure. And mainly governments all around the world, including the US government, have invested a lot and are planning to invest even more to expand these EV charging infrastructure. For example, the US Department of Transportation and Department of Energy are investing about $5 billion to build about 500,000 charging stations nationwide. Similar trends also are observed in Canada, Europe, and all across Asia. So the problem is that the EV ecosystem is vulnerable to cyber attacks and exploitations. Now, some of these examples could be malware attacks, default or weak credentials, or sometimes vulnerable firmware and used protocols. The other thing is that when we looked at the literature, we found that there is a lack of knowledge about the security posture of existing EV charging stations against remote cyber attacks. So why should we worry? Now, the first reason is that we need to protect these devices, right? And the second reason is that studies showed that compromised IoT devices or cyber physical system devices could be used as effective attack enablers to perform large-scale denial of service attacks or scanning over the internet. Now, with the increasing number of insecure EV charging stations in the wild, and the fact that they have more complex software, firmware, and computationally powerful systems, and more importantly, the fact that they are connected to critical infrastructure, such as the power grid, for example, this opens the doors for considering vulnerable EV charging stations as a new attack vector that could possibly harm or affect several stakeholders like the EV users, the operators, and even the power grid. So, an EV charging ecosystem is basically a cyber physical system with several stakeholders, with the EV charging management system as its core component, where it provides a collection of software that instruments the underlying charging station while providing remote control and management capabilities over the internet. So in our study, we consider an adversary who wants to exploit vulnerabilities of existing EV charging management system to gain control basically over the underlying charging station and perform remote cyber attacks against various stakeholders. Our aim was to investigate the security posture of the deployed EV charging management systems in the wild, while also due to the lack of empirical data about the deployed EV charging stations, we had to basically propose an approach that relies on two parts. The first part is EV charging management system device discovery and then security analysis. Now, to discover these EV charging management systems, we looked at existing IoT or CPS device search engines. For example, we looked at Shodan and Census, and we found that these online search engines have a number of limitations. For example, they mainly rely on banner analysis, and there is limited banner information associated with deployed EV charging management system. Also, due to the lack of standardization in the deployment and implementation of these management system, there is a lack of EV-specific rules or tags or identifiers that could be used by these search engines to identify EV charging stations that are deployed online. So these limitations all lead to a limited number of discovered EV charging stations using existing search engines. So the question is, how can we leverage existing search engines to extend the EV charging management system discovery and fingerprinting results? Now, we started our approach by performing an iterative device discovery. So we leveraged 4 well-known device search engines such as Shodan, Sensis, FOFA, and Zoomeye. We performed an initial search and lookup using a number of a comprehensive list of EV-related keywords, and we built an initial database of identified EV charging management system seeds. Following that, we collected and parsed assets from firmwares, web instances, and vendor-specific websites. We also extracted identifiers from file system items, DOM elements, and EVCS-related strings. Now, given these identifiers that we collected from the assets, we queried the search engines using these new identifiers to identify a set of extended or new hosts. And by parsing the charging management system's portal's HTML page, we also extracted structural, style, and text context, and introduced the DOM metric by calculating structure, text, and style similarities for those web instances. At the last step in the device discovery, we performed a binary classifier to distinguish between EV charging management system and generic host by using 14 EV specific features. We also followed this classification by taking the identified EV charging management systems and performing a clustering analysis using the DOM metric that we introduced to basically group similar EV charging management systems together and identify a representative candidate that could be used to update our initial database of identified EV charging management systems and to be used for iterative search over several iterations throughout our approach. Now, in terms of our results, the initial search using these online search engines resulted about 1,800 EV charging management system hosts that were from 9 different products or vendors. Now, we also noticed that some search engines performed much better than the others. For example, Zoomeye and FOFA had significantly more results related to EV charging management system as compared to the more generic online search engines such as Shodan and Sensis. Now, in terms of our extended search result, as you can notice, we significantly improved the result by discovering 27,000 EV charging management system hosts. And we were able to basically amplify the results when using all 4 different search engines. For example, we found 20 times more search results when using Zoomeye with our discovery approach, and 40 times more results when we use Shodan and Sensis with our approach. And more importantly, we identified a total of 44 EV charging management system products, representing 35 additional new products that were not discovered in the first round of search. Now, we also had some other observation. For example, in terms of the geographical distribution of these identified hosts, we found that they were distributed across 21 different countries, with 78% of them to be located in 5 countries. Now, this is a biased result, and we believe that this is due to our initial search result, which were used as a seed to expand the additional search result. And we believe that these devices that were used in the initial search are more commonly used or deployed in these specific countries, and therefore we see more of these instances in the advanced results in the second or third iterations. In terms of the used ports and services by these management system, we found that they used various ports, and mainly they relied on HTTP and web services. They also commonly used SSH and some alternative web ports. But what's important is that some of these EV charging management system products, they use specific port combinations that could be used for targeted discovery of these devices and these products in future searches. Now, after doing the discovery, we move to the security analysis of these identified hosts. So we started the security analysis of candidate EV charging management system. First, we performed asset analysis. We dissect the collected assets and identified compiled, non-compiled, and endpoints. We also performed white box analysis on binaries and scripts and black box analysis on endpoints. We also performed vulnerability analysis by tracing execution flows and identify flaws and find vulnerability entry points and cleansing weaknesses in the analyzed assets. We also leveraged common tools to find sensitive functionalities, intercept traffic, and find insertion points. We also utilize custom testing procedures to detect different classes of vulnerabilities within these hosts. After that, we analyzed the candidate EV charging management system and crafted a proof of concepts for every vulnerability and performed targeted scan by sending a precise number of requests and parsing the responses for indicators. And finally, we use side channel techniques to infer vulnerabilities by leveraging version string and banner correlation. In terms of the quantifying the security posture of EV charging management system, surprisingly, we found that the majority of these devices, about 92% of them, were vulnerable. And these account to about 25,000 of the identified hosts. And these come across all the different vendors that we identified in our result. Now, we also identified about 120 remotely exploitable vulnerabilities that with some of them that could lead to compromising and controlling the underlying EV charging stations. Now, these vulnerabilities, they fall under 13 classes of CWE vulnerabilities, which could range from critical to medium severities, with about 14,000 of these hosts representing 29 unique products out of 44 EV management system to be vulnerable to critical or high severity vulnerabilities. Now, in terms of the identified vulnerabilities, we found 5 critical severity vulnerabilities, which could affect 7 different EV management system products. And these vulnerabilities could lead to different issues like extracting databases or accessing configurations of these devices. Also, we identified 4 high severity vulnerabilities, which affect 22 management systems, and which could lead to hijacking accounts or manipulating settings. And finally, we found 4 medium severity vulnerabilities, which affect 30 EV management systems, which could lead also to viewing settings or accessing functionalities. Now, in the paper, we also discuss attack implications. And specifically, we discuss attacks against the EV charging stations themselves. For example, we show how our identified vulnerabilities could lead to manipulating the charging processes and configurations on the device, downgrading or modifying the firmware, creating botnets of EV charging stations to be used as network proxies, or even lock the EV charging stations or disable features and basically result in some denial of service. We also discuss attacks against the users or operators, and we show that we might be able to obtain personally identifiable information. We can obtain charging records or even log data on the charging stations. And finally, we could also infer or leak electronic billing data. And finally, we discussed attacks against the critical infrastructure such as the power grid, and we show that an adversary can control the charging processes of a large number of compromised EV charging stations and perform coordinated frequency instability attacks that could lead to cascading failure over the power grid. We also established a coordinated vulnerability disclosure process in order to mitigate basically the identified vulnerability. So we communicated the vulnerabilities to the responsive developers or vendors, and we provided them with sufficient time prior publishing our data in order to give them time to mitigate and update or patch their products. We also got acknowledged by some of these manufacturers or vendors, and 20 CVE-IDs were assigned to the identified vulnerabilities by some of these vendors. In terms of patch follow-up, we noticed that when we revisited the EV charging management system products, we noticed that only 18 of them have addressed some of these identified vulnerabilities, while 26 category of these management systems are still vulnerable to the identified vulnerabilities. More importantly, among the hosts that we identified, 84% of them are still vulnerable because they haven't updated their software in order to basically patch the identified vulnerabilities. So to summarize the main takeaways of this work, we explored the security postures of EV charging ecosystem by introducing the EV charging management system as a new attack surface. We also proposed an effective approach to address the limitations of existing device search engine and significantly improve the EV charging management system discovery and fingerprinting processes. We also shed light on the insecurity of EV charging management systems at scale by uncovering more than 100 zero days. And we also contributed to the security of EV charging ecosystem by communicating our findings to system developers, which resulted in some instances of successful patching of products. And finally, for future work, there is always room to improve the work and work on the accuracy or efficiency of the device discovery and security analysis procedures that we had in our approach, while we also aim towards building a real-time EV charging management system discovery and analysis platform on the wrong line. Thank you very much.
Can you elaborate on the vulnerabilities how it works? Because it seems to me that most of these dashboards are binary. So how did you discover the SQLIs and the successes that you end up in reporting vendors?
Now, to be honest with you, this work has lots of details, lots of technical details that we cannot go over. We try to elaborate on this later, but there were different types of instances. For example, we had firmwares that most of them we were basically web portals or web pages that we downloaded or we were able to access. So I believe that there is no one way to access those or find the vulnerabilities. So depending on the type of assets, we have to go through lots of variable and automated analysis to come up with these specific vulnerabilities. So it's not like the dashboard is there and cannot access. So usually they have web portals, and you can infer some information from each type of this EV out of the system, depending on how they deploy.
So would you say that the majority of these vulnerabilities that you discovered in manual analysis?
I would say it contained a lot of manual analysis in the beginning, but because we did this iterative approach, we were able to automate some of these vulnerability discovery for future rounds of analysis.
And how do you manage these errors aligned SQL injection or input project?
Nowadays, these details I think that I have to talk to my student to go always in leisure. So I can invite you to discuss this with them afterwards.
Behind create routine for the national as the NDSS work. This cluster around to the point made a lot of these systems will be as you said, 4 different charging management systems. Same we're all using common protocol and then protocol and with stupidity.
Not necessarily. But I also see the unique between the charging stations and the portal. Right. So we were looking at the portals.
Right. So I was wondering if so that is important under specifying or there's some security or anything else.
This is actually done by our other students who are working on. I like the charging stations and the portals, but this work is more of the identifying these online internet accessible basically systems and trying to find the
Right. Okay. So then my fight presumably that they also will be able to determine there are several sort of vendors out of those systems here. You do identify those as coming from common code bases or any random in terms of homebrewed systems or systems proprietary tricks. Repositories.
We didn't see like common implementation, although some of the management systems, they have different namings, but as you said, they come from like a mother company who actually has different deployments. So this was common, but we noticed the lack of standardization in deployment and implementation of these devices, and this was very common. And this is one of the main issues that make them insecure, basically.
Right. Sorry, one more. Did you reach out to any of those that you could identify and engage in discussion? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.